Hi, I'm Johnny and welcome to my channel. So we're going to do something new today. I've decided to jumpstart a series called Bookwise where I'll distill and discuss some of my favorite nonfiction books. So we're going to kick off this series by starting with the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So who is this book for? This book is for anyone who is interested in a career in psychotherapy, anyone who is curious about how the average person can deal and cope with extraordinarily unfortunate circumstances, or anyone who is struggling to find meaning in their own lives. As we're about to head into the video, make sure to hit the subscribe button and notification bell if you want more content just like this. I primarily make career development videos, however, I learn new things every single day, and everything I learn I'll be sharing here on the channel. Man's Search for Meaning is divided into two primary parts. In the first part of the book, Viktor Frankl, the author, details and reflects on his time and experience as a prisoner in an Auschwitz concentration camp during World War II. Unlike other books during this time, this book was less concerned with the stories of horror and injustices, and through an in-depth analysis, he attempts to answer the question, how is everyday life in a concentration camp reflected in the mind of the average prisoner? He starts off by describing the three phases of an inmate's mental reaction as they adjust to camp life. The first phase is characterized by shock. So upon arrival of the camp, a lot of the new inmates, even though they've heard horrific things about what camp life was like, out of desperation, they would still try and convince themselves that their situation would be different. So pretty much all of the new inmates are not yet accustomed to the level of brutality that exists within the camp. Some of them would be beaten for trivial things. For example, Victor recounts a time where a guard would line up the prisoners, and if one person was just slightly out of line, they would get struck in the back of the head. So these minor offenses are cause for major consequences. And it's things like these occurrences accumulate and cause such intense emotion that it's so overwhelming to process, and these inmates, rather than feeling these emotions, go into a state of shock, and many began to see death as the only escape. And in phase 2, it's characterized by a state of apathy. Shortly after their arrival, the prisoners quickly fell into a state of apathy, a sort of emotional death or dullness. The brutality that once caused them all this overwhelming emotion and shock has now become normalized. It's basically their new normal. This mental state of apathy is like an emotional shield. It serves a purpose, and for the prisoners, this allows them to channel their emotional energy to solely focus on anything having to do with their immediate survival. And this makes total sense. Rather than the prisoners talking to others about love or their future, they would talk and even dreamt of things like food and the sensation of feeling warm. Victor shared a memory where there was a typhus outbreak and several people died. And for the prisoners, rather than feeling disgust or sadness looking at the corpse, they saw it as an opportunity for more food, more clothing that was left over from the newly deceased. And in the third phase, it describes the prisoners' reaction as they're liberated and adjust back to normal life. And their mental reaction was really disbelief. After being in a state of apathy for so long, it was difficult for them to live a normal life. Prisoners couldn't fully comprehend what was happening to them, and they couldn't experience pleasure yet. They had dreamed of being free for so long that when it finally came, it just didn't feel real. And after returning home, the prisoners' expectation of a warm welcome didn't happen either. They came back to find that their towns had been burned down, or that their family that had been separated earlier were probably already killed. The prisoners also had the expectation that others would feel compassion for what they had gone through, but rather those people would just respond, hey, I've suffered too, and they didn't really comprehend the extent of what the prisoners had gone through. Aside from the three phases that describe the prisoner's mental reaction adjusting to camp life, Viktor Frankl also talks about some coping mechanisms that certain prisoners had that made camp life a little bit easier. And there were several of them, but I'm going to pick out the two most interesting and relevant ones for me. The first way of coping was recognizing that they still had a freedom of choice. So while some prisoners pretty much viewed themselves as dead and just merely existing within the camp, others made decisions where they could. As an example, there were some men that would walk through the camps and offer comfort to others, or even their last piece of bread to whoever needed it more. He did mention that there were few people like that. However, it still serves as an example that people still have the freedom to choose how they respond, the freedom to choose their attitude in the most difficult of circumstances. That's something that nobody can take away. You always have that choice to choose. The second way of coping was that certain prisoners were able to deepen their spiritual life despite being malnourished and mentally worn down. These prisoners were able to retreat from their terrible environment, their terrible surrounding, and retreated into this rich, vivid world that they created in their own mind. This is how he explains the paradox of how certain prisoners that were of a less hardy makeup were able to survive camp life better than others. In Viktor's personal experience, he talks about how him and the other prisoners in the early morning would go march from campsite to worksite to dig in trenches. And it's during these marches to the worksite where he would, in his mind, cling onto an image of his wife. And it was during one of these marches to the worksite where a prisoner in front of him in line collapsed. And it briefly interrupted Viktor, but he quickly retreated back into a world of his own in his mind where he was yet again having a conversation with his wife, imagining her smile. And this allowed him to not pay attention as much to the physical toll it took on his body to hike in snowy weather. Now that's what worked for Viktor, but for some other prisoners, it was reliving the bits of happiness in their old memories. And for others, it was as simple as appreciating the sunset as they're digging the trenches. At the end of the day, it ultimately was referring to where the prisoners were placing their focus. This strengthening of their spiritual life allowed prisoners to seek refuge in a place where the guards couldn't take away. And I think most importantly, the prisoners were able to feel a connection to something beyond just themselves. Very quickly, if you guys like this video so far, be sure to give it a thumbs up and comment down below letting me know what you think of this book summary so far. And if you've already read this book, let me know what your thoughts are. In the second part of this book, Viktor Frankl talks about logotherapy, which is something he developed himself. And it's basically a theory, and I'm paraphrasing here, that it's human nature to be motivated by your life's purpose. He then goes on to explain that there's no general meaning of life. Everyone has their own specific purpose at any given moment. And he proposes that there's 3 ways you can find out your life purpose. The first is by creating a body of work or doing a deed. The second is experiencing something or encountering someone we love. And the third is to respond to life's challenges as authentically and humanely as possible. Now that concludes the second part of the book summary, but there are a couple notable things I want to mention. And the first is an interesting analogy that the author uses. The analogy that he uses is that a man's suffering is similar to the behavior of gas. If a certain quantity of gas is pumped into an empty chamber, it will fill the gas chamber completely and evenly, no matter how big the chamber. Thus, suffering completely fills the human soul and conscious mind, no matter whether the suffering is great or little. Therefore, the size of human suffering is absolutely relative. I mean, first off, what an incredibly bleak analogy. Secondly, I just think about the times where a friend is going through some tough times and they're wanting to share it with you. And then maybe, I end up saying like, yeah, I've been through worse. Suffering is relative. And, maybe what you've dealt with is hard on you, but whatever they're dealing with, even though you may feel like it's not the same, it's very real to them. It's relative to them. It just makes you think. There's also an amazing quote that Viktor uses, which is that he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. I think this quote is incredibly powerful as well, and it makes me think about my loved ones. Like, I would do anything for them. I would move mountains, bend over backwards to fill whatever need that they might have. And for you, it might be a loved one, it might be indulging in a passion, but whatever it is, it has to be a strong enough reason why to know that you can break through any hurdles that life throws at you. Now, I first came across this book, Man's Search for Meaning, in another book, and I actually have it right here. It's called The Tribe of Mentors, This is basically a huge compilation of short life advice from some of the best, most successful people in the world. They're basically the top dogs of their respective fields. From Larry King to Terry Crews, Marie Forleo to Ray Dalio, and many, many more people, when they were asked in this book, what is the book that you've given most as a gift and why? Or what are the 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? Man's Search for Meaning was the book that came up way more times than I can count, and I can 1000% see why. Guys, I recommend picking up a copy for yourself. I think all of my hardships combined in my life doesn't even come close to Viktor's, clearly, but reading the stories, it makes you think about how you can apply the concepts to your everyday life. Like, you don't have to be struggling to the same extent that he did to reap the benefits of his wisdom, and you don't have to be suffering at all to take time to discover what your life purpose is, or how you can adopt some of these coping mechanisms to navigate your day-to-day life better. Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, go check it out. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like, I'd love for you to join my newsletter. And for more videos like this, you can subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified. And if you haven't already done so, give this video a like and comment down below if you have any nonfiction recommendations for me. Thanks so much again. See you next time.